second seminar this morning, and that's going to be given by Alistar Huong. Alistar, thanks again for joining us, being with us. So if everyone could try to settle in and get a seat here. If you need to continue any discussions, you could be in the foyer. So let's just have a short prayer. Our Father, we're grateful for your blessings today and that you've helped everything to go smoothly. And we're so grateful for your protecting care, for your angels. And we just ask that you would bless this next hour and a half, that you would speak to our hearts and help us, Lord, to know your will in our lives. So speak through Alistar, speak through your word, and bless us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, Al.
We're on. Welcome back. I know it's been a lot already, a lot of good stuff, but we're going to keep moving ahead with our next seminar. And this one, as you've already heard, how to find God's will for your life. But particularly, we're looking more on career, God's will regarding our career. And I think there are applicable lessons in other aspects of life as well, but hopefully this will be helpful in that regard. And you see the title, Your Life Calling Guaranteed. That's a pretty strong claim. And I'm going to see if I can back that up today with some of the things we're going to share and talk about. And so what we're going to do today, we are going to take a look at some principles, of course, of how to find God's will for our lives, in particular related to our career and life calling. But before that, I'd like to just begin by sharing a little bit about my professional journey, where I've come from, where I am now, what I'm doing, and kind of the path that God has taken me. Just also to give you some background about who is talking to you today. So my story begins at Washington Hills Academy and College. I went to academy there. I graduated. I went to Washington Hills College. I managed to squeeze 4 years of college into 5 years. And there was actually a health incident in the middle of all that. I actually wrote a little book and all that. You can find the story on Audioverse. I won't get into that here. But I ended up also teaching at Washington Hills for a number of years after I finished college. And so academy, college, and staff. I got the triple crown, I guess, at Washington Hills, or a hat trick, if that's another sports analogy for you. And I also married my wife when we were staff there. Our wedding was near campus, and we were married on October 10, 2010, which means I can never forget my anniversary because it's 10-10-10. That's my wedding anniversary. So Washington Hills Academy and College, I got a secondary education degree, and that's why I ended up teaching in high school there for a few years. Now, it was very apparent to me quite early on in my teaching career that I just could not envision myself doing the same thing year after year in the classroom. Teaching Algebra 1 year after year, or Bible class, or computer class, or whatever classes I was teaching, it became quite clear. And around that time, my wife and I felt a call to go overseas to Asia to help start a missionary training school. However, there was a problem because I was not a leader. I had no management experience. I've never run a school or any ministry really. I was a volunteer with church groups, and I was a volunteer with Audioverse at the time. And I was also one of the vice presidents for GYC for a number of years. But that was basically it. I knew enough to know what I didn't know. And that is, I really was not cut out. I didn't have the experience or any skills really to run or start a school. So that's when my wife and I decided to go to Southern. That's where I enrolled in a graduate program in the School of Business. I was not classmates with Michelle, who is a professor there now, but we are good friends though. But at Southern School of Business, I got what is officially known as the MSA degree. That's the Master's of Science of Administration, which really is the MBA program. But they couldn't call it the MBA because all my electives came from the School of Religion. It was a joint program. And this is relevant because of later on in my story, how this was a perfect match with something, what God ended up having me do. So it was a 2-year program at Southern, getting my master's degree in business there. About 6 months before I graduated, I went through and I experienced what was really a type of spiritual crisis. It was how to know God's will for my life type of crisis. Because independently, my wife and I both started having this strong conviction that it was not God's will for us to go overseas. And there were indications over there. There were things that didn't seem quite right. But more than that, it was just in our personal devotional time, it just became this burden. And of course, we grew up hearing mission stories. Like, it is always God's will for you to be a missionary. Like, if God opens the door for you to go overseas, like, if you don't go, it's clearly because you are faithless. So it was a spiritual crisis because we're like, are we frauds? Is our Christian experience just all a hoax? Are we just being so faithless? But we were surrendering and we were praying. We're like, Lord, this is really, we had planned this. We paid all this money to get a degree for the purpose of going. And we're still willing to go unless you close the door. But it was this deep, abiding sense. And of course, a lot of people, they didn't understand it. And there were a lot of, finger wagging and tongue wagging type of thing from people who knew us. But it became clear that was not where God wanted to go. But to kind of wrap up that end of the story, I have to take you to the next step, which is Audioverse. Okay, so let's put my spiritual crisis aside. 6 months prior to my graduation from the School of Business, put that to one side. I need to give you a little background about Audioverse. Audioverse is an online ministry that distributes free Bible content online. And it was started in 2005 by a young man who was then a medical school student, 2 young men actually, who were both medical school students at Loma Linda. One of them is Tim Arakawa, who happens to be my brother-in-law now. He wasn't back then, and I didn't really know his sister back then, who is my wife now. But his other friend, our friend, Curtis Farnham, was a software developer, engineer actually, in his prior life before medical school, and they kind of met, and Audioverse started as the proverbial 2 guys in a dorm room type of story, like the tech Silicon Valley legends, right? It kind of happened that way. And I was one of the early volunteers of this organization. I was friends with them, and we just kind of got all involved as young, single men without careers, students, lots of time, energy. So we just did a lot of stuff with Audioverse. We started recording and going to conferences, GYC, stay up late, burning CDs and posting stuff and editing and running around with, audio recorders, the startup, young, vibrant, volunteer, youth ministry type of thing. Now, over time, Audioverse grew. Praise the Lord. It was started in 2005. And by this point in my life, in the part of the story when I was at Southern, it was about 2012. And it was 7 years into the life history of Audioverse. And what happened was the ministry continued to grow, more users, more content. The software and websites became a thing. When we started Audioverse, the iPhone hadn't been invented yet. It's hard to believe. There were no iPhones. But by the time we were in 2012, there was an app for everything. Everybody had an app. Audioverse didn't have an app because we were a bunch of volunteer young men who began this ministry with no family, no children, no job, just students volunteer. Well, as life happens, many of these young men started to have careers. You remember, they were medical school students, so now they're doctors and residency and fellowship and all these things. Everyone started getting married, and then they started having children. And priorities, I have to help with my kids' Sabbath school program at church, or I'm now on the church board. And these types of things happen through the natural course of life. And Audioverse, all of a sudden, as a volunteer organization, just kept dropping down in everyone's list of priorities. I was on the board around this time when the ministry realized we were headed for a crisis. This ministry of Audioverse, this is not going to stand. The cracks in the foundations were showing the weight of the growth. There were emails from people from even people willing to donate money to the organization that were just going unanswered. And questions of, when things break down, there was nobody to fix them, things of this nature. So the board was looking at this, and they were having a serious soul-searching type of meeting. It wasn't even what we talked about in the last session about mission and strategy. It was just, is this ministry supposed to continue or not? Like, maybe God just wants this ministry to be, a small thing that had its time, and, we just kind of recognized it played its part and it's time to move on. And in fact, the board drafted up a list of potential parent ministries, larger ministries, that we could offer to put Audioverse up for adoption, saying, would you just take it and run it? Do whatever you want with it. All the equipment, all the recordings, the website, domain name. We were actually having that conversation. And this was happening right at the same time that I was undergoing this spiritual crisis of, where, God, do you want me to go? And that's when the board looked at me, the Audioverse board. I was on the board as a secretary, and they looked at me and they said, hey, you're finishing a business degree. How about this? Let's give it 4 months. They looked in the bank and they had a couple $1,000, and they're like, hey, we'll give you a small stipend, emphasis on small, which for us self-supporting institutions, we understand how that goes. And they said, we'll give you 4 months. That's all the money we have. And let's just give it a try. Let's just see, is there enough support out there for this ministry to stand on its own 2 feet? And if it doesn't work out after 4 months, we really wouldn't have lost anything. We'll just come back and pick up this conversation of finding a ministry to adopt us and all this. So I went home, I talked to my wife, and her first words, it was one word. It went like this: no! Exclamation mark. It was like, things just got from bad to worse. Like, we were supposed to go overseas, like we're still not sure. And now that you want to work for this thing that has no future, it's like, it's going to fail. We have no money. It's going to be like this 4-month experiment for nothing. And what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Like, it was just more confusion. But actually, we calmed down and we said, well, no, we need to pray about this. So we fasted, we prayed, we deliberated. And it was like the peace of God washing over me, where it was like the door swung open, beams of light coming down from heaven. It's like, you need to do this. You need to do this, was the deep sense of impression. And so my wife definitely came around. She's fully supportive now. We accepted the 4-month trial experiment with Audioverse. And I guess you can say the rest is history. The money just came in. We weren't like overflowing with cash, you understand, but it was enough. It was enough for the board to say, okay, let's take this another year. But even more amazing than that, there were other people that essentially came out of the woodwork. People that came out of the corporate world, people who were also willing to join in and help this startup go as employees, because a lot of the volunteers, they couldn't commit anymore. They came in being willing to work for close to nothing to make this thing go. And, one guy, one of my friends in particular, he was married with children and all this stuff. He had responsibility, but they made a decision to sacrifice and to see if this thing can really go. And they were exactly the right people that we needed at the right time. But more than that, providentially, you realize I had just gone through a business program, business degree at Southern, and I was getting the degree for another purpose. But from the first day I started my job at Audioverse, it was like everything I had just learned at school, I was applying. I mean, everything. You go to school and you learn a bunch of stuff like, oh, I'll never use that again. No, it was not that. My graduate program, literally everything. Business strategy, management, HR, accounting, finance. You go down the list, everything was being applied. It was like God had put me through that program specifically for this job. It was providential. It was providential. I could not have seen this ahead of time, but in retrospect, it was absolutely clear why God had put me in that position. Now, I don't want to, take all this time talking about Audioverse and make this a commercial, but you must be wondering, well, how has Audioverse done since then? So in 2012, I became the executive director of the ministry. We brought on a few team members, and we've had different team members since that time. We have a team of 7 now, and we have never suffered a single year of financial destitution. We've been in the black every year. We have grown every year. We are doing more than ever. We're reaching more people than we have ever done in our history, and souls are being won because of the ministry of Audioverse. And I have a ministry report tonight, so I'm not going to spoil some of the testimonies. You'll have to come back for that this evening, and I'll be sharing a little bit about some of the exciting stuff we're working on. But in terms of the life career, life calling, the position that God had prepared for me, Audioverse was very, very obviously what God wanted me to do, looking back in retrospect. But that's not the end of my story, because after 2012 or so, we were settling into Audioverse. We were doing our work there. My wife and I, we started writing a blog. It was a personal finance blog called Saving the Crumbs. You see, my wife and I, we have a strange fascination with money. We are extremely frugal. Some would call it cheap. I accept that. And we decided, hey, why don't we just document some of the stuff our thoughts, and it might be interesting, if nothing else, to record for our posterity. Someday it'll be something fun to teach our kids how we manage our money. For example, we both worked for ministry. She worked for back then Asian Aid, which is Child Impact. They're a member of OCI, right, James? Child Impact? Yeah, they are. So OCI ministry, I was at Audioverse. So 2 ministry salaries, and we bought a house and paid it off in 2 years. So we told that story, and we started writing all about how we save on our grocery bill and all that kind of stuff. Well, the blog never really made any money. That wasn't the purpose. This is what the blog looks like today, actually. But the blog led to other things. We were doing the best, with documenting our thoughts, and people found it curious and interesting. But then what happened was, because of my prior life at GYC and also my current position at Audioverse, I had connections and people knew who I was, and I did public speaking and so forth. And people were like, oh, you talk about money. Well, why don't you come and speak at these various events? And one of the first seminars I was asked to do, finance seminars, was at GYC. I think this was in 2015 or 17. I don't remember the year, but it was somewhere in there. I was invited to be a speaker at GYC doing a finance seminar. And I did my seminar at GYC, which their content goes on Audioverse, and from Audioverse, it goes to the world. You kind of see how everything kind of comes full circle. And I got more seminar invitations, and this one, the picture on the screen here, happens to be at the Michigan Conference Camp Meeting in 2021. But these seminars don't just stay as seminars. You know how afterwards people with questions would come forward. And I got a lot of questions. People were asking questions about their money and their finances and what to do about this, and my inheritance and my business and my credit card debt and student loans, and all of these questions started coming in. And eventually, I would help as best I can. Eventually, the questions got to a point where they were like, can you just manage my money for me? Well, the answer is no, because you have to be properly licensed. It's a highly regulated industry, the financial industry, because lots of scams and fraud and things like that. So I can't do it. So I just started looking around. Who can I refer them to? And a lot of these people specifically wanted an Adventist advisor, for good reason, because we have our own values and perspectives on things, whereas a regular financial advisor, a secular one, they may not understand those things. I understood that, but then there were precious few Adventists, committed Adventists, advisors I could refer people to. There are a few, but not many. And so I started getting advice from some of my friends who were familiar with this industry, and they looked at me and said, maybe this is God's way of telling you that you should do it. Maybe this is a call for you to get the training to provide this service because people trust you and they want to work with you. I prayed about it, and I went back to school and got the Chartered Financial Consultant designation. It is kind of like another degree, but it's a professional series of training. It's a certification for comprehensive financial planning. And so with this, I was able to get licensed, register with the state properly, to start my very own financial planning firm called Advent Edge Financial. And so now, to be clear, I still work for Audioverse, and Audioverse is my full-time job. It is my first priority, but my financial planning business is a hobby that I do on the side. And a lot of people look at me kind of cross-eyed, like, what? Normally people they have a career out in the world and they do ministry as the hobby. Like, no, ministry comes first in my case. The financial planning actually, in a real way, is a ministry, because all these Adventists are like, hey, I need help with my money. Please come help me. And so that is what I do part-time. So what is Advent Edge Financial? It is a comprehensive financial planning firm that helps people align their faith with their finances. But to get more specific about it, I deal with a comprehensive view on people's financial health. So when we talk about the health message, we don't want to just prescribe a pill for just treating one symptom. We want to look at the person holistically, right? Whole person health. I do the same thing with the finances. A lot of times financial advisors, they just recommend buy this product, invest in this stock, get this insurance policy, or just do this one thing because they're looking at things very narrowly. Well, I take a comprehensive view on finances, and this acronym, SECRETS, gives you the picture. So S for stewardship, of course, with our faith system, that comes number one. E for education and employment benefits. C for cash flow and debt management. R for risk management and insurance. E for estate planning. T for tax planning. S for savings and investing. So that gives you a comprehensive view of everyone's, generally, most people's financial picture. And so now this is my current status. I've come from Washington Hills. I went to Southern, kind of circuitously, ended up at Audioverse, and even more kind of out of left field, started writing the blog, which, by the way, is still available online, but we haven't really written on it actively since we became parents. And most of my financial ministry attention has gone towards seminars and also the actual working with clients directly. And so that's what I do part-time with the financial planning firm Advent Edge Financial. Now, one thing I have discovered, both in my own experience as well as in my experience working with young people in different contexts, GYC, Washington Hills Academy, college, and so forth, Southern, is that when we were younger, maybe in high school age or so, maybe you can relate. We think like this: I can't wait to grow up. I can't wait to be done with high school so I can decide what to do with my life. I'm tired of people telling me what to do, what time to get up, what homework to turn in. Like, I'm tired of that. I want to be free. You heard that? Fast forward a few years. After shelling out, thousands of dollars for a degree, changing our degree again, I'm still undecided. 5 years into a 4-year degree, that's kind of what I did. You know what people think? What I've heard people say? I have no idea what to do with my life. I'm getting tired of this spinning my wheels. I wish someone would just tell me what to do. It's funny how life can just flip us around. We often think, you know what? I wish there was a formula. Can't God just give me a formula to figure out what I should do with my life? Have you ever thought this? Wouldn't it be nice? Well, what if I told you that there is? So let's transition now into our Spirit of Prophecy study. And I want to start with this quote, found in the book Education, page 267. It's ... meaning this comes at the end of a paragraph. I'm not going to show you the first part of the paragraph first, and you'll see why. This passage ends with these words: these are the rules that ensure safe guidance in the choice of an occupation. How do you like the sound of that? What does the word ensure mean? Certainty, guaranteed. You remember the title of our seminar presentation, Your Life Calling Guaranteed. Well, that's what I'm hinging that title on that word. These are rules that ensure safe guidance in the choice of an occupation. And rules sound to me a little bit like a formula, wouldn't you say? So do you want to know what the rules are? Are you sure? Because you know what happens once God tells us what the rules are. You sure you want to know? Well, you probably have already pulled it up on your phone if you're like me. Well, let's take a look. What are the rules? We need to follow more closely God's plan of life, to do our best in the work that lies nearest, to commit our ways to God, and to watch for the indications of his providence. These are the rules that ensure safe guidance in the choice of an occupation. There you have it. Those are the rules. And to summarize it a little bit closer or simpler for you, these are the 3 simple rules that guarantee, ensure our choice in an occupation. So what are the rules? Let's go through them one by one. To do our best in the work that lies nearest. Actually, I think we need to practice this together. This is something we ought to commit to memory. All right, so let's say it together. The first one, what's the first rule? To do our best in the work that lies nearest. Okay, number 2, to commit our ways to God. Number 3, to watch for the indications of his providence. Let's say that one more time and see if you can say it without looking at the screens. Okay, number 1, to do our best in the work that lies nearest. Number 2, to commit our ways to God, and to watch for the indications of his providence. Those are the 3 rules. So let's talk about each of them in turn. What does it mean to do our best in the work that lies nearest? Well, let's just start with the word best. What does it mean to do our best? You tell me. It's not a trick question. Would you say to give it our utmost effort? To be responsible? To be faithful? Does it have anything to do with the size of the responsibility? He who is faithful in that which is least shall be faithful in much. We ought to do our best in the work that lies nearest. Another word for best in my mind is excellence. We ought to strive for excellence in everything that we do. Okay? Now, what does it mean, the work that lies nearest? What does it mean, nearest? What are some examples of something nearest? What you've got to do now. Yes, what's in your hand, right? That's what God said to Moses. Or can I put it this way? What God has already revealed to you. Because guess what? A lot of times we come to God saying, please tell me what to do with my life. But we're not being faithful to what he's already revealed to us. And God looks at us and says, why would I tell you what to do over there when you're not doing what you need to right now, right here? And what we are doing right now may be the needful preparation for what he wants us to do in the future. We can think this through practically. All right? For a lot of us, we go through school. If we don't do our best in school, guess what? We're not going to do very well in any job, right? I mean, that's the basic stuff I try to teach my 8-year-old. You have to be responsible so that you can do stuff with more excellence in the future. But like Naaman, he was willing to go climb a mountain, conquer an army to get healing. But all he needed to do was go wash in the River Jordan. And he's like, I can't do that. But why would God give him more light if he's not willing to follow the light that he already has? The simple stuff ahead of us. So to be faithful in the little things as well as the big things. So one of the things about doing our best in the work that lies nearest is this idea of experience. Getting a breadth of experience. And for the young people in this room, there is something to be said about getting a well-rounded education. There's a lot that Ellen White has to say about this. A well-rounded education does not mean that we have to be good, like, a superstar in every single thing. But to get a well-rounded experience in life, because that lays the foundation for us to understand where it is that our skills truly lie. We're going to come to that in a moment. So practical skills. Okay, what if we're already in the workforce? I am an employer. I have employees and I hire and all of this. I can tell you one thing. There is a thing called a linchpin employee. Do you know what a linchpin is? Like imagine you have a wheel and there's a pin that goes in, the hub, and it keeps the wheel from falling off. If you are a linchpin employee, your employer, even if there's a recession, which people, everyone says is coming, you're going to be the last person he's going to want to let go. And if he's starting a new venture, or if he needs to grow, if he needs to have more responsibility, you're the one that he's going to look at, because he realizes if you're gone, the whole operation falls apart. Linchpin employees are those who do their best in the work that lies nearest. Okay? But there's another idea here that I want to share, is this concept of 10,000 hours to mastery. Have you ever heard of this idea? So the summary is that for every expert in any field, whether it is a scientist or an athlete or a musician or a I said scientist already, or a teacher, artist, writer, they need to spend at least 10,000 hours in practice. 10,000 hours or 10 years. Those are two roughly equivalent numbers. It means that these people spent a lot of time honing their craft. If it's a chef or an artisan or a craftsman or a builder or a quarterback or a soccer player or a violinist, whoever it might be, what did those people do in order to gain the mastery in their respective areas of specialty? They did the best in the work that lied nearest. They practiced, they grinded, they had grit and determination, even when it was difficult, even when nobody knew what they were doing, even though nobody would really ever notice that they didn't, practice their piano for an hour or whatever it might be that they're training for. So for us, doing our best in the work that lies nearest is filling out these 10,000 hours that we need in order to have mastery in what God wants us to do. And one thing we have to realize is that what God wants us to do, he may not be able to reveal to us yet, but he still needs us to go through the training. Let me give you a biblical example. Joseph was sold into slavery, into the house of Potiphar. Did he do his best in the work that lied nearest? Oh, yes, he did. But you know what? He spent those 10,000 hours gaining the necessary preparation to be the prime minister of Egypt. He had no idea. He just had to be faithful to do what was in front of him. Because if he didn't, he would not be suited and not in the proper position to be able to carry the responsibilities yet to come. So Joseph was a man who did his best in the work that lied nearest. He put in his 10,000 hours. And maybe today, there might be a young person. They're just going out knocking on doors. They're a missionary out in the mission field. They're just trekking through, whatever country, or knocking doors in a big city, grinding, getting doors slammed in their face hour after hour, but they're not getting calls. They don't have a high-paying job. They don't feel like their life is going anywhere, but they're just putting in the practice to win souls. Guess what? That person is going to be the one that has experience to become that evangelist that God needs to call when the moment is right. Sometimes the training doesn't really make sense at the time, but in the grand scheme of things, God is able to use us in the future. One of the things another analogy I like to put related to this point is this idea that God can't steer a ship that's not moving. A big ship, if it's just sitting still, it's not going anywhere. You can't turn that thing around. You have to be moving. And so sometimes, and this is related to something we said this early, doing our best in the work that lied nearest, it's less important to sometimes, not always, it's less important to know that the work is precisely, exactly, perfectly right or correct. But it's the fact that we are giving God our best. We're going to give you an example. I'm going to give you an example a little later when we wrap up these three of how we might even be doing our best in doing something that's going the complete opposite direction. But because we are faithful to God and honest-hearted, he can actually turn us around very quickly. So do our best in the work that lies nearest. Okay, that's number one. Let's go to number two, to commit our ways to God. This one I think is a little bit easier to understand, but very hard to apply. Because what happens when things don't go our way? Are we still going to trust in God? When you when you're sold into slavery, like Joseph, You do the best with the tasks given to you. You help your master Potiphar's home prosper. And what do you get paid with? You get thrown into prison. Are you able to commit yourself to God still? Well, Joseph did. He kept doing his best in the work that lied nearest, even though there was no hope, really, humanly speaking. What if we fail a test? What if we, that test, the MCAT, that to get into medical school, and now I can't? What if we don't get the job that we applied for? What if our position is downsized? Or what if we don't get accepted? And what if we get injured or we get an illness that just completely throws our life off course? Are we still going to commit our ways to God? That's the question. And related to our message this morning during our devotional, committing our ways to God is to keep up with Jesus, right? To understand, when is God telling us to stay still and to wait and to endure and to be patient, versus when God is telling us to pick up the pace and to go, right? Understanding that requires committing our ways to God. Committing our ways to God also means not choosing to go our way when things don't go the way we want. And why is this important? Because the next point is to watch for the indications of his providence, and it is not possible frequently for us to detect the providence of God if we are not committed to him. Because the providence of God is not always lightning bolt from heaven. Frequently, it is a still small voice that if you are too preoccupied with your own opinions and your thoughts, we're going to not hear it, and we're not going to see the fingerprints of God in the way that things are happening. And so we want to watch for the indication of his providence. That's number 3 now. And this is what we always want. Like, we want this first. God, show me a miracle. Open the door. Make it clear. Answer my prayer. Send someone out of the blue to tell me what to do. Or like, write it in, like in the clouds. We want something miraculous to tell us what to do and where to go. Now, in the case of Joseph, this is a great story for, his life calling. It was miraculous what happened. He got plucked out of the prison. He interprets the dream, and Pharaoh creates a brand new position in his cabinet and says, here, you take care of everything. You're second in command. Let me go, enjoy my parties and whatever. You take care of running the kingdom. The providence is the fun part. But we really have to go through the 2 previous steps in order for that third step to make a difference. Because guess what? We like to get it in reverse. We like to say, no, God, you miraculously show me first what you want me to do, and then I'll commit my way to you, and then I'll do my best. Doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. We have to get the order correct. And, a lot of times we are content in sitting still and doing nothing until God miraculously opens the windows of heaven. Well, no. God requires us to be moving in order to steer us. And, one of the things that's important about this, actually, one of the things that's important about this is that if we don't go in the proper order, this is why a lot of times we lack the perseverance and the grit to go through the difficult times. Because if we had put in the work, doing the work that lied nearest, committing our ways to God, and seeing the providence that led us there, it is a lot easier for us to understand when it is to stay put. When it is that God says, okay, you really have to just bear under this, buckle up, and push. Whereas it's easy, if it was handed to us too simply, we just turn and run. Our feeling is, well, I guess this wasn't God's will for me after all. Let's just wait for the next lightning bolt from heaven to take me some other way. And a lot of times people, they bounce back and forth, waffling, because they haven't done things in the right order. I'll give you a biblical example. Moses actually had the luxury of having divine providence indicate the direction of his life work right at the beginning of his life. Miraculous, life-saving, incident on the River Nile. He became the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He was raised up by his mother, preparing him to be the deliverer of Israel. I mean, talk about heady stuff for a little kid. He was faithful to God still, as far as we know. He also got the training. Like he had the providence and he committed his ways to God, but then when it came time to do the work, he took matters into his own hands, didn't he? He didn't wait for God. He thought, "Oh, well, I'm so high and mighty. I'm the chosen one or whatever, and I have all this training. Well, let me take care of this nasty Egyptian." God had to unwind the tape in Moses' life. He got this order in reverse, and he kind of made a mess of things. So God says, let's rewind, let's reset, let's start over. I'm going to take you out to the backside of the wilderness, and now I need you to do a new work. I need you to tend sheep for 40 years. Are you going to do that to the best of your ability? Are you going to be the best shepherd you're going to be? Are you going to be excellent in that work? Are you going to commit your ways to me? Are you going to trust in me still? Only after that needful training did the burning bush appear. And even then, Moses was like, "Oh, Lord, I can't do this. I can't speak. I have a stammering tongue. But this, but that." And finally, the lack of trust in self, God says, now I can use you. Right? God had to get the sequence of events back in the right order. We don't want to get them in reverse. What about the Apostle Paul? Did he, before he was converted as Saul, the Pharisee, did he do his best in the work that lied nearest? Yeah, but what was that work? Persecuting God's people. He was killing the Christians, but he did his best at it. Was he sincere, though? He was deceived, but he wasn't willingly in rebellion against God. That's a big difference. But he did his best. He committed his way to God, and that's why, in his case, he literally had a lightning bolt from heaven. Jesus appears to him, blinds him, knocks him off his horse, and in one encounter with Jesus, he gets flipped around 180 degrees, and all of a sudden, we have the author of the majority of the New Testament. None of us would be Christian today without the Apostle Paul. God prepared him for the work, even when he was headed the complete opposite direction. God can't steer a ship that's not moving. And this promise, when it says it ensures the safe choice of an occupation, it means it. Even if we don't get every minutia right at every moment. So in my experience, not to say that I am on the same level of Moses or Paul in any stretch of the imagination, you realize I'm not equating myself. But as an illustration, I saw this at play. I did my best. I was a teacher. I felt the Lord's calling. I was going to go overseas. I believed the mission of the church. I aligned my life to it, and I wanted to get the training for it. And so I went to school, and I excelled in my program, and I was going to graduate and do all this thing. I committed my ways to God, wherever you want me to go. I wasn't locked into one step, one thing. And providentially, God created a position that previously never existed in the history of the world. Custom tailored just for me at that time in my life. Talk about providence. I have seen these rules apply in my own life, and I know for a fact that they will work for you. Not just because it worked for me, but because God said so, and we can take him at his word. And so this is important. We don't want to get those rules in reverse. Now, we could wrap up here, and I think we have enough to go off of the rules, but there's more. Okay, we're going to take a little bit more time here to go through our presentation. And I go until what time? 12:30, is that right? Let me just make sure. Yeah, 12:30. So we still have 45 minutes. So we're going to go through a series of principles beyond these three rules. Okay, so we have the three simple rules that ensure the safe choice of an occupation. If you forget everything else I said, don't forget that one. Okay, that's the important one. That's the guarantee. But there are other things I think can supplement this process of finding God's will for our lives. So we're going to look through 6 principles, and we're going to walk through them together. Number 2, the second principle is to fight in our own armor. Fight in our own armor. What do I mean by this? We've been going through the book Ephesians, so I realized we need to clarify this in Sabbath school, and we are to take on the armor of God. So we are to fight in the armor of God. I'm not talking about that type of armor, you realize. I'm talking about the story of Saul and David, where Saul or David was going to go fight Goliath, and Saul said, here, wear my armor. And David's like, I can't go in these. I'm going to get killed wearing your armor. He had to go with his individual set of skills and talents. And that's what I am talking about. The Spirit of Prophecy says this in Education, page 267. The specific place appointed us in life is determined by our capabilities. Not all reach the same development or do with equal efficiency the same work. God does not expect the hyssop to attain the proportions of the cedar or the olive, the height of the stately palm, but each should aim just as high as the union of human with divine power makes it possible for him to reach. So beginning at the end of that statement, it's talking about excellence. We ought to do with excellence whatever it is that we put our hands forward to do. However, are we all capable of doing the same things? No. I'm going to say something that's going to be might be a little offensive, but don't take it the wrong way. Are we all equal? It's a little bit of a trick question. The answer is yes and no, right? That's the honest answer. We are equal in moral worth. We are all equal in the eyes of God. If it were just one person who ever sinned, Jesus would have still died for that one person. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about capabilities. Let me put it this way. Were all of the servants of Jesus given the same amount of talents? No, they weren't. It doesn't reduce their moral worth in the eyes of God, and this is where we really have to get things straight. Heaven's way of calculating worth is not the same as humanity's. The Spirit of Prophecy is clear that not all do with equal efficiency the same work. We are not interchangeable cogs in a machine. We are members in the body of Christ. We have unique gifts and talents, spiritual gifts and actual physical gifts and whatever, intellectual gifts. We all have differing levels of ability. It doesn't make anyone superior or inferior. This is where the world, with the way that our market system is set up, we talk about net worth and people's salaries, and we equate that with people's value in society. Well, in heaven's economy, we got to throw that out. Realize that. Just because someone earns more money on earth does not make them of greater worth in God's eyes. I think we understand that. So the point I'm trying to say is that we need to understand that we are not all the same. God expects us to strive for excellence in all that we do, but he wants us to be fitted in the position that best matches our talents and our capabilities. Okay? The next statement corroborates this. Education, page 232. The natural aptitudes indicate the direction of the life work, and when legitimate, should be carefully cultivated. At the same time, it must be kept in mind that a well-balanced character and efficient work in any line depend to a great degree on that symmetrical development, which is a result of thorough all-round training. You know, this really makes sense. Our life work should align with our natural aptitudes. Now, is that to say we should not stretch ourselves and to get ourselves, out of our comfort zone and to learn new things? No, the statement is clear. An all-rounded education. Just because we are more intellectually and academically inclined does not mean we should not work with our hands and learn more mechanical things and work on the farm and things of that nature. You understand? But in terms of the life work, you don't want the nerdy accountant type to run your farm. You understand? Or to build your house necessarily. You want the people who are best suited for the task. And different, we all have different natural aptitudes. And this might come, and this makes sense because God made us. Do you believe that? We all believe that. And God recognizes the work that has to be done. So doesn't it make sense that he's going to make us with specific skills to fit specific needs in his work? If he's a master creator, intelligent designer, and all of these things, then there ought to be a design, a product market fit in business terms, where we are created in his image, but with certain skill sets to meet the need in the field that he sees. That's just only logical with an intelligent and creative God like we serve. Now, here's something else that might be mind-blowing to you. Our natural aptitudes tend to align or tend to lend itself to things that we're good at and therefore things that we enjoy. Is it okay for us to find a career in something that we enjoy doing? You know, we're going to come back to this point a little bit later, but I'm going to just mention this now. God has our best interest in mind. And frequently, not always, but frequently, the place that God has designed for us is some place that will match with our natural aptitudes, which aligns with our natural desires. I shouldn't say all our natural desires, but our passion, things that we find enjoyment and pleasure in doing. Okay? Not all the time. It's not to say it's going to be hard, but there is generally an alignment. So somebody who enjoys working with numbers probably is going to be more inclined in a career that's that direction. People who are more physically active, kinesthetic, hand-eye motor coordination, there's probably going to be something more that direction. Someone who's more musical is somewhere in that direction. I'm talking in generalities, not specifics. Does God call us out of our comfort zone to do something that we're never trained for? Sure, sometimes. But generally speaking, based on this quote, there is an alignment with our natural aptitudes with our life work. And so I'm going to speak a little bit more openly and transparently with you if I can. There is, I think, within Adventism, an unspoken script, an unspoken doctrine, if you will. The unspoken doctrine of acceptable, pre-approved professions. If you are somewhere in the medical field, you're good. Health message, you're fine. Gospel ministry, missionary, church administrator, pastor, evangelist, Bible teacher, okay, acceptable, you pass. If you're a teacher in any form in our educational system, that's education work. Yeah, that's good. Publishing work, somewhere in the church strata, church structure, yeah, okay, yeah, we like you. But what about a lawyer? I want to be an entrepreneur. Ooh. I want to be a data scientist or a software developer. I want to be an aeronautic engineer. All of a sudden, we're like, what about a finance person? I guess as long as you write big checks to the church, we'll accept you. You understand what I'm talking about? There is this pre-approved, unspoken list of acceptable positions, like certain silos. If you're outside of that, like, you're kind of, we'll kind of find a way as long as you can, like, absolve yourself by being active in church and donating money. Yeah, maybe. If you're an ASI member, yeah, okay, all right, I guess you're fine. But this attitude, I think, permeates in a subconscious way. All right? And I'm going to go even a step further, where a lot of times we hear young people saying, the church is so judgmental. The church won't accept me the way I am. Well, there's a lot that goes into that. But when it comes to the career piece, I think this unspoken doctrine, nobody intentionally is communicating to it. And I'll be honest, a lot of this, jabbering on about the church is so hateful, like I haven't seen it personally. I think a lot of it persists in the subconscious. And this is one element of that, where people have a certain natural aptitude, certain set of capabilities and skills where they feel like they have a fit in a certain area in which they can contribute, perhaps not directly to the gospel in the traditional sense, but perhaps to the world in some way. And God might be laying a burden on their heart, but the church doesn't recognize it. We don't know how to talk about it. We don't have a lane for them. And all of a sudden, their natural reaction is, well, I guess if I can't find, acceptance in this one area, I guess none of it's for me. They're going to not want me, any of me. So I'm just going to take myself out of the church. You understand? So this whole idea, I think, of God's will in our careers, there is a little bit of, interaction with some of the broader challenges that we see with the young people in the church and so forth. But let's continue, because the next point is directly related to this. So we want to fight in our own armor, which means find the natural aptitudes and the capabilities, align that with the work that God wants us to do. That's generally the way that's going to work. And number 3, find the right fit. And I've already been referring to this, so it is actually continuation of the same idea. But notice, those aren't my words. This is what Ellen White wrote. Education, again, page 267. Many do not become what they might because they do not put forth the power that is in them. They do not, as they might, lay hold on divine strength. Many are diverted from the line in which they might reach the truest success. Seeking greater honor or a more pleasing task, they attempt something for which they are not fitted. Is it possible to do something that's good, but you're not the ones cut out for it? Apparently, that is the case. Continuing. Many a man whose talents are adapted for some other calling is ambitious to enter a profession, and he who might have been successful as a farmer, an artisan, or a nurse fills inadequately the position of a minister, a lawyer, or a physician. There are others, again, who might have filled a responsible calling, but who, for want of energy, application, or perseverance, content themselves with an easier place. So this is not just a fit in terms of our skills, but also of how much we apply ourselves. And she talks about both extremes of the spectrum. There are some who are overly ambitious, she says. Maybe they want the money, they want the prestige, they want the power, they want the influence, whatever it might be, and they end up clamoring for a position for which they are not suited. And she gives some example here. Some, they want to be a lawyer, a pastor, a doctor, when they should have been a farmer, an artisan, or a nurse. Those are her examples. But then there are others, she says, who could do more. But quite frankly, they're just too lazy. For lack of energy, application, or perseverance. What is that but laziness? They just aren't willing to put their shoulder into it. And they content themselves with an easier place. And so the right fit is also matching our energy level and our level of application. People that end up doing work, even if it is good work that they are not intended for, in the end, less good is done in the work of God. So some of us, we might look for the easiest job that pays the most, or we might be looking, I want to have prestige, and we do something that we are not cut out for. But guess what? It's okay to not earn as much money as a doctor. Remember, that's how the world calculates value. But in the eyes of God, value is calculated in how much good can you do for the kingdom of heaven. And we might be able to do far more good in a low-paying, not so prestigious position than to clamor for something for which we are not suited. Now, what is needed for us to understand this? Okay? It is this very difficult word called self-awareness. Because how do we know this? A lot of times we think that we are well capable of doing that task or that thing. Or maybe we think, I'm already working so hard, when we're actually kind of being lazy. How do we develop this self-awareness? Well, number one, yes, prayer. But frequently, we need humility. Humility to accept constructive criticism from those who know us. We need to have people in our lives, family, friends, coworkers, whoever it might be, who are able, who have permission to speak into our experience when we need it. Someone to tell us, look, you're not cut out for this. You're really messing this up. Like, maybe this is not this is not the right place for you. Do you have someone like that in your life that can speak that into your experience? And are you willing to listen to them? On the other side, we need to be willing to listen to our peers and our mentors and people who say, you are capable of so much more. You need to apply yourself. You need to put forth more effort. You need to get up and go out and do something great for God. Stop being so lazy. We need to be willing to hear those words of constructive criticism, and that takes humility. And that requires openness, and oftentimes people are not going to volunteer that information. And so this is a practical step, is to seek out those types of mentors who can speak into your life the necessary insights from your blind spots. We've all got them, right? It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just a recognition that they're there and how it is going to help us find the best place where we fit in God's work. Now, this next point, I'm coming back to something I mentioned earlier. Just because something is hard doesn't prove that it's God's will for you. I feel like this is also a little bit, I need to speak a little bit about this unspoken doctrine that might occur in the Adventist psyche, particularly those of us that might be more inclined for the conservative end of the spectrum. Let me just start by saying what I am not saying. I am not saying that God never calls us to sacrifice. God never calls us to do something hard. That's not what I'm saying. God very well might call us to do something hard and sacrificial, something that brings discomfort and is not pleasurable to us. What I am saying is that the level of the degree of difficulty or lack of desirability, that's not how you determine whether something is God's will for you. Okay? Because I think sometimes we have this idea that if I have a list of options, whichever one is the most painful, the most distasteful, most sacrificial, the one I dislike the most, the one that is going to make me suffer the greatest, that must be God's will for me. I must I got to give that some extra points in the calculation. I know I'm exaggerating things a little bit, but I'm trying to do that to make a point. And the point is this, kind of 2 points. What if that's not where the best fit is? If we're thinking this way, and God wants to place us over there, and maybe he does want us to be a doctor. Maybe. I don't know what God's will is for you, but let's suppose he wants you to be a doctor. And guess what? Doctors get paid a lot of money. And you're like, no. I know I've got the skills, the academic ability. I know I'm talented with bedside manner. I know I can do it, but no. I have to be something else. Mechanic, plumber, something else that I'm not totally suited for, but because I dislike it more, that must be God's will for me. Guess what? God is robbed, his work is robbed of a good physician. More than that. That's one point. Other point of this is this. This way of thinking is a form of salvation by works. What difference is it of Martin Luther flagellating himself to pay penance for his sins, climbing Pilate's staircase on his knees? It's the same thing. We're saying, Lord, I am going to take my character development into my own hands, and I'm going to punish myself so that I can be more holy. That's not how this works. Character development is going where Jesus leads. If it happens to be to medical school and we get paid more, so be it. If he wants us to be a doctor where we have to raise money, so be it. God doesn't measure in the way that earthly, salaries and net worth is measured. He just cares about having the best person for the job that needs to be done in his field. And so we have to just remember that just because something is hard, and on the flip side, I think I have to say this, just because something is easy doesn't mean that's God's will for us either. Right? Just the easiest path, the path of least resistance, that also does not mean automatically that that's God's will. I'm just trying to address the unspoken, sometimes logic that we are thinking through when we work through these decisions. So to be sure, we must be willing to sacrifice all should Christ ask us to do so. But just because something is sacrificial does not necessarily mean that that is God's will for us. You understand the nuance I'm trying to communicate here? Okay, good. So let's move on to the fourth point. The fourth point is that there is not just one quote-unquote right choice. There is not just one right choice. I need to qualify myself a little bit, because is it possible for there to be a wrong choice? Yeah. Oh yeah. Very wrong, right? There could be very, very wrong choices. If we're making a choice in an occupation that takes us clear out of God's will, contrary to God and rebellion to him, opposed to his word and his principles, clearly that is a wrong choice. But within the offerings of good, better, best, there may be a range of options that may not necessarily be a moral evil. Let me address again. I'm taking the opportunity to speak very plainly with you because I believe you can take it. There is another kind of unspoken type of thinking process with a lot of us in Adventists, and that is that because we have the truth, and there is only one truth, and one God, and one church, and at the end times, there are only going to be two groups of people, the saved and the lost, the righteous and the wicked. You understand what I'm going with this? Therefore, every decision, in every instance, in every particular, there are only two choices, and they are always in this binary of good and evil. That is a very convenient way of looking at the world. Unfortunately, it is simply not true. There are many decisions that do not carry with it the moral weight of sin versus righteousness. I'll tell you a story. I was backstage at GYC one year, and I was going to introduce Pastor C.D. Brooks. And he was advising people. They were coming in, getting advice to young people. They knew this is their chance to talk with Pastor Brooks. I was sitting next to him, and we were to go up, so I couldn't leave. So I, unfortunately, I didn't want to eavesdrop, but I could hear everything they were saying. There was a young man that came up to him, and he was distraught. He said, "Pastor Brooks, I'm dating this girl. How do I know she's the one? How do I know she's the one for me?" Pastor Brooks, without missing a beat, he said, "Young man, when you chose to follow Jesus, you already made a decision that you are never going to marry a girl who's no good. I assume that she's an Adventist, church member, blah, blah, blah. So the only question is she good, better, or best?" And of course, he gave an answer of how to determine that, whoever helps you stay in the will of God. But what's his point? There is not just one woman or man for you. It is possible for individuals to have healthy marriages to more than one person. Not at the same time, obviously. You get my point. But if they had not married that person and had married someone else, it is still within the realm of possibility for them to have a healthy, happy, godly marriage. You understand what I'm saying? It's not a moral, there's not this idea of this soulmate idea that the world panders. That's not biblical. That there's only this one person, and I'm married to the wrong person because that person over there is my soulmate, and they're married to someone else, but who cares? We are destined by the universe to be together, and therefore we throw out all moral constraints. You understand the danger of that kind of thinking. E.J. Wagner, some of you know the history, he actually had a little issue with this, later on in his life. He taught spiritual affinity, and, he ended up having an affair, and he was divorced from his first wife. But what is the illustration here? The point is that in the same way, when we choose a career, there may be multiple paths to success within the general boundaries of God's timeless principles. I'll give you a benign example. Should I be a doctor or should I be a dentist? Guess what? That's not a moral decision. It's not like if you choose the wrong one, you're going to be lost. I mean, generally speaking, maybe in some, very specific instance, I want to be careful. But generally speaking, should I be a teacher or should I be a nurse? Should I be a missionary in this country or that country? Should I be a pastor or should I become a professor and get my PhD and teach in a university? You understand what I'm saying? We're clearly within the boundary, in the safe area. There is room for us to make a choice. And in fact, the statement says, save guidance in the choice of an occupation. It implies more than one option. God doesn't tell us that there is only one place. And guess what? It's up to you to find that one needle in the haystack that is your life calling. And if you don't find it, tough luck, buddy. That's not how this works. In fact, just like the statement we read earlier, he might have had success as a farmer, an artisan, or a nurse, giving the impression that they could have picked a multitude of options and still have found success. So we sometimes give ourselves a little bit too much pressure to make the choice. And because sometimes when we make every decision of such grave moral consequence, we end up being paralyzed by analysis paralysis. This decision is so weighty, so big, so I'm not going to make any decision. But remember, we read earlier in our devotional time, sometimes it's better to make a wrong decision while moving forward than to sit back and not make a decision at all. Because it is a process, not a destination. The process of finding our life work is a lifelong journey, because guess what? How many of us have been in the same career, same job, same position for our entire life? I mean, I don't really know of anybody. So it could be that the process is God needs to take us step by step. He might need us to be a slave in Potiphar's house first, and then a prisoner in the dungeon before we can become the prime minister of Egypt, or a shepherd in the wilderness before we can lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. And so not every step, and God understands where we are. I'll give you another story. At Audioverse right now, we have two, in fact, employees who were Seventh-day Adventists before this, but not necessarily in the same level of commitment, shall we say, as they are today, a number of years back. And these two individuals in particular work in our product and technology department. They're IT people, engineers, software developers, so forth. They were in the corporate world, developing software for, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles in Indiana, Deloitte, and the largest dental lab in the country, and all of these big companies. Was that wrong? They were Adventists. God had them there at the time, but guess what? Over time, as God led them in progressing light, they started homeschooling their kids. They want to move out in the country. They recognized the urgency of the time of spreading the three angels' message. And guess what? The Lord opened the way at the right time, at the right place, where they came into contact with Audioverse. And now we have the skills in the organization that we need, because God led those people in the right process in their spiritual journey, so that now they are exactly what we need in our organization, fulfilling the mission of the three angels. It was not a wrong choice, even though, if we go back to what we were saying earlier, if it were up to us, we wouldn't send anybody to work in Silicon Valley. Oh, that's the den of the devil. All those weird, crazy people out there, godless, secular people. Why would we send anybody out there? Well, guess what? We might not send them there, but for people in their specific place in their Christian journey, that may well be the process that God must take them through. And in our case at Audioverse, we're very thankful that we have people with those skills in our organization now. And the biblical example also is Paul and Barnabas. They ended up splitting and going their separate ways. Was that some terrible rupture? I'm sure it didn't feel good at the time, but the work of God continued to go forward. And so, moving on here, there is not always just one right choice, but this then leads us to the next point, and that is number 5, make good mistakes. Make good mistakes. I heard a story told by Elder Ted Wilson not long ago. He said there was a young man who was being mentored by an older gentleman. And the young man asked the older man, "How can I be a good leader? Teach me how to be a good leader." The older gentleman looked at him and he said, "Okay, sure. To be a good leader, you need to learn how to make good decisions." All right, good decisions. So how do I make good decisions? Old man says, experience. You need to gain experience. Oh, that makes sense. All right. So how do I get experience? The old man smiled by making bad decisions. That comes actually from Mark Twain, who said, good decisions come from experience. Experience comes from making bad decisions. You see, oftentimes we have a fear of making mistakes. Because, back to what I mentioned earlier, we sometimes equate any mistake as rebellion against God. If I make a mistake, I am lost. Some mistakes are that serious. Yes, that is true. But not all mistakes, right? Not all mistakes are created equal. So the point is not whether we're going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. The question is, how badly and what are the consequences are those mistakes going to be? So the way to break this down, really, I think, recoverable versus irrecoverable mistakes. And this actually, I think, plays into how we can determine God's will for us. Recoverable mistakes are exactly what they sound like. They are mistakes that we can bounce back from, we can learn from. They help us get back, pick us up, and make us stronger. And generally speaking, these mistakes are those that we make earlier in life and our career, meaning the younger we are, generally speaking, and the more obscure the mistakes are, meaning they happen outside of the public eye. Whereas irrecoverable mistakes are things that tend to happen later in our career, particularly when we are more publicly visible. In the Bible, John Mark was a fellow traveler with Paul and Barnabas. He made a mistake. He deserted them. He made a mistake that ended up resulting in Paul and Barnabas splitting up too. So there were consequences to that, but it was not irrecoverable because later on in life, John Mark was reintroduced. He was accepted back into Paul's ministry. I'm sure he learned from that experience. But what about Moses? At the end of his life, he made a mistake, didn't he? He was to speak to the rock when he struck it. And as a result, he couldn't step foot into the promised land. God kind of gave him the silent treatment there for a moment too. Of course, we know the end of the story. He still was resurrected and brought to heaven, but he could have been resurrected to heaven and have gone into the promised land. I mean, this was everything that he strived for in his life, and he was not able to go in. And other mistakes like Saul, he lost the kingdom, like all of these types of mistakes are very, very serious, and they are irrecoverable. And so for us, we need to understand that we should not be afraid to ever make a mistake. We just need to understand the difference between the two, and as far as within us, opt to make the recoverable mistakes, not the irrecoverable ones. So how do we do that? Number one, make our mistakes early and in obscurity. If you go to a training program or a school, make your mistakes there. If you need to practice, I'm just going to use myself as an example. I do public speaking now, and most of my messages get posted on Audioverse. You can be sure that I think sometimes twice, 3 times, 5 times before I say something. Because if it's going to go out on Audioverse and everybody in the world hears it, there could be consequences. But you know what? I am so glad that my very first sermons I ever preached were back before the days of YouTube and live streaming. Because I go back and I'm like, oh, have mercy. It makes me cringe. I'm glad nobody associates those messages with me, you know? Make those mistakes early. Understand, gain the needful experience working with people who have made the mistakes to spare you from making the mistakes. A lot of people that I've come into contact with, particularly in my role at Audioverse, public speakers, evangelists, ministry leaders, and so forth, oftentimes those later in life who make those catastrophic mistakes where they fall from grace, they're never heard from again, their ministry is destroyed. You know what I'm talking about. Oftentimes, those people never got the right training. Oftentimes, those people are the ones that were elevated too quickly. They shot up into the stratosphere because of social media, or their sermons get all over the place, they get invited to speak and blah, 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 and they're like super famous, but they never got the training that they needed to basically, to put it, transparently, they never ate the humble pie. They never tripped up, made mistakes, had to be corrected. They never had somebody pick them up, dust them off, give them a word of counsel and advice, and they're just flying high, and all of a sudden, they're not prepared for the temptations that come, and they fall severely. And sometimes those blunders are so grave, the entire ministries are destroyed. And I will offer this word of caution, and that is, in this day and age of social media, it is very easy for even those of us who are younger, without a platform, without a big ministry, to destroy our influence in a blink of an eye. We have to be extra careful to make mistakes in private. Don't make your mistakes out in the public eye of social media. It's not a good idea. It'll follow you forever. Guess what? I'm an employer, and whenever I have an application, do you think I check their Facebook profile and Instagram? Yeah, you bet I do. And there have been applications that we don't take to an interview because of their social media profile. I mean, this is practical stuff. Don't make irrecoverable mistakes. That's what I'm saying. It makes a difference in how you end up finding work in God's vineyard. And so this takes us to our final point, and that is know God has a plan for you. Principles to finding God's will. Number 6 principle, know God has a plan for you. Let's read a couple Bible promises together. A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Proverbs 16:9. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Proverbs 3:5-6. I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. Psalm 32, verse 8. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye call upon me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you. And ye shall seek me and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart. Jeremiah 29:11-13. These Bible promises tell us the position and the frame of mind, the posture that God has towards us in regards to finding his will for our life work. Based on these promises, does God want to reveal it to us, or does he want to conceal it from us? His desire is to reveal his will. He is not trying to hide it from us. We just have to comply with the conditions. The condition is to seek for him with all our hearts, to be honest-hearted, to actually ask. Sometimes we say, God, show me your will, but we're like, I don't really mean it. Or sometimes we say, show me your will, but we're like, but only if it's something I like. We're ready to disregard it. And if God's like, if you're not going to obey, why would I reveal it to you? And so when we come into this place where we're looking for God's will for our experience, I just want us to leave with this understanding. When Joseph was called out of the dungeon to be the prime minister of Egypt, God created a position that previously did not exist, custom tailored just for him. When Moses was given the job at the burning bush to lead Israel out of the promised land, that was a position that had previously never existed in human history. Abraham, called to leave his family, Ur of the Chaldees, make a brand new nation out of him. That's never been done before. It was uniquely tailored to him. We can go down the list. The Apostle Paul, he was not called even by the traditional means of apostleship. God had a special role and a specific set of training tailored just for him. And in my experience, I am not on the same level of all these people, but I told my story, so I'm just using this as an example. My position at Audioverse created, previously never existed, right in the time when I was transitioning and I was in need of a job. God made the role custom tailored for my training. If God did it for all of these people throughout sacred history, and if he did it for me, what does that mean about you? That's what we mean when we say God has a plan for you. God has a plan, and he is the creator of heaven and earth, that he can create out of nothing a position, specifically a place in his vineyard, specifically tailored for you if he needs to. We just have to believe it, and we just have to follow the principles. What are they again? Number 1, we have to follow the 3 rules. What are the 3 rules? Let's review them real quick. Number 1, to do our best in the work that lies nearest. Number 2, commit our ways to God. Number 3, to watch for the indications of his providence. So follow those 3 rules, and they will ensure the safe choice in an occupation. Number 2, we need to fight in our own armor. We need to find out, understand our natural aptitudes, our skills, our talents, our capabilities, and that is where the place of God is likely to be for us. Number 3 is related to that. We need to find the right fit, but not just with our talents and our capabilities, but also with the level of application. Okay, don't reach too far. Don't be too lazy either. Number 4, there is not just one right choice. We need to be careful not to get in this mindset that every decision is a life or death moral decision. Sometimes God does give us a range of choices that are all acceptable in his plan. Number 5, we need to make good mistakes, and mistakes that are not irrecoverable. Mistakes that help us grow and build and become better, but not those that has destructive qualities for God's work. And number 6, know God has a plan for you. He can create a position for you if he needs to. And so this takes us to the conclusion of our time together. I don't think you would mind if we ended 5 minutes early. I know it's been a long morning. But let's go ahead and bow our heads with prayer, and we will wrap up here. Father in heaven, we are so thankful that you care about the practical things in life. You have a place. You have a plan prepared for us. We simply want to be faithful to your principles that we might be found in that position when you reveal it to us. I pray, Lord, that we'll follow these principles. Help us to understand how to do our best in the work that lies nearest, to commit our ways to you, to see your indications of providence. Help us to put on the armor, to leverage all of the talents you've given to us for your work, to be found in the right fit. Help us to learn how to make proper decisions between right and wrong, also not to be willing to make mistakes, the right kind and not the wrong kind. And help us to trust in you in all our ways. Bless us in the remainder of our weekend together here at this retreat, and may we be faithful until you come, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.